All right, guys, good morning. This will be preaching for this Sunday. Um, Real quick, I got a message from Miss Carmen earlier this morning, said that keep Lawrence and her in your prayers. Lawrence is improving. He's doing better daily, she said. She's getting adjusted to being at home, and so y'all just pray for them. Pray for Cliff, still having trouble with his leg, and just keep him and pay him in your prayers. Lawrence's mother, need to keep her in your prayers. Pray for Jack and Kim and Tyler. He's going to EKU today. Y'all just lift him up, and all the kids who are leaving for college, just pray for them. Those kids that are going to be going back to school, pray for them, that the Lord work all that stuff out, help them out with this. Keep Noah in your prayers, and Sister Sheila. And if you have any other ones, send them to the group. Leave them in the comments. One way or the other, you guys just remember to keep each other lifted up. Keep us lifted up. We found out this morning that our friend who had been tested, and his family, all those tests came back negative, so they're in the clear now, which means that we're in the clear, which is kind of what we figured anyway. We didn't figure we were in any danger, but still thankful for the prayers, and thank you guys for praying for us. This morning we're going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 5. 1 Samuel chapter 5, and I'm going to read verses 1 through 4. 1 Samuel chapter 5, verses 1 through 4, the Bible says, "And the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer unto Ashdod. And when the Philistines took the ark of God, they brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon." Now Dagon was their god. He was their big god. He was the god of their gods. "And when they of Ashdod, they rose early on the morrow, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. And they took Dagon and set him in his place again. And when they arose early on the morrow morning, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. And the head of Dagon and both of the palms of his hands were they were cut off upon the threshold on the stump of Dagon was left to him." Now I'm going to use that to preach a sermon that I call "The Day Dagon Fell Down." The day Dagon fell down. Now, just by way of introduction, first of all, there was defeat. Now, what had happened here is you had the armies of Israel. They had been fighting, and they had challenged the Philistines. The Philistines came out, and both of them were in array against each other, the Bible says, and they were just going at it. And you'll find over in 1 Samuel chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, that's where this happens. They're there, and they're ready to go, and it says there, "And the word of Samuel came unto all Israel." Now, Israel went out. They went out against the Philistines to battle, and pitched beside Ebenezer, and the Philistines pitched to Naphek. And down there in verse 2 it says that the Philistines put themselves in array against Israel, and when they joined battle, Israel was smitten before the Philistines, and they slew out of the army in the field about 4,000 men. So here they are, they're fighting, and you have Israel. They're ready to go. They're ready to fight. They're armed up. This is the people of God. This is God's chosen people, and they get out there in the battle, and they're there. And you've got them on one side, you got the Philistines on the other, you got these giants and these little Israeli people, and they go to fight, and they meet there in the middle, and Israel they get hammered. I mean, 4,000 men are dead at the end of the day. That's a pretty bad upset. And so there was defeat, but then there was dependence. Look in verse 3, it says, "And when the people were come into the camp," it says, "When the people were coming to the camp, the elders of Israel said, Wherefore hath the Lord smitten us today before the Philistines? Let us fetch the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of Shiloh unto us, that when it cometh among us, it may save us out of the hand of our enemies." So here they go. They're in the camp. They're there. What in the world happened? Who let us down? How did this happen? What are we doing? How could they whip us so bad? One of them says, "Let's get the ark. Let's get the ark." Notice what they say about it, though. They don't say, "Let's get the ark of the Lord, that God can deliver us." In verse 3 it says, "Let us fetch the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of Shiloh, that when It cometh, when the ark cometh, it may deliver us. The ark may deliver us. They were dependent on the ark as an item. They weren't dependent on God. They weren't dependent on the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were dependent on that box of gold with those things in it. They said that box will defend us. That box will save us out of the hands of our enemies. They were dependent on the wrong thing. And then thirdly, by way of introduction, there was despair. You get down there at the end of chapter 4, Israel's been beaten. You've got the Philistines taking the ark. As a matter of fact, whenever the man comes back to Israel, I preached on this before, you've got old Eli there by the temple, and they tell Eli that his sons are dead, that the ark is gone. And whenever they mention that the ark was gone, Eli rolls out of his chair backwards and breaks his neck. And then you've got, if I'm not mistaken, it was the wife of Phineas. She's given birth, and she just doesn't care about the baby because she finds out the ark is gone. This is what it says, 1 Samuel 4:21 and 22. And she named the child Ichabod, saying, the glory is departed from Israel, because the ark of God was taken, and because of her father-in-law and her husband. Then she said, the glory is departed from Israel, for the ark of God is taken. She was upset about the ark being taken. She wasn't upset as much about her father-in-law being dead and her husband being dead as she was about the ark leaving, because she knew that ark was the pride and joy of Israel. I mean, that's where God dwelt. That's what it was. And so all of Israel, if this is any indication, they were in despair because that was it. I mean, it was like God had just taken his hands off the people. It was like God was done. It was like that the gods of the Philistines were superior. So let's look moving forward into this sermon about the day that Dagon fell. Who is Dagon? You'll go back to 1 Samuel chapter 5 now in verse 1, and it says that the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from the battle place from Ebenezer unto Ashdod, where they were dwelling. And they took the ark of God, they brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. Now Dagon was a fish god. He was half man, half fish. His top half was a man, his bottom half was a fish. We would call him a mermaid, or a merman, I guess, if you wanted to, be correct about it. He was from Manoah. Now the Manoans, they were on the island of Crete, just off the coast of Greece. That's where they were from, and very, very big fishing area. Of course, they use the sea. They would travel a lot. Dagon, he was the chief god of the Philistines' gods. He was the top of the cake. I mean, he was it. He was what they wanted. Whenever they were going to war, when they had big decisions to make, they didn't go to a lesser god. They went to Dagon. But especially war. So you can imagine these giant Philistines. They were really dependent on Dagon, especially after they just whipped the Israelites with the Ark of the Covenant. That was a big deal. Now they're back at the house of Dagon. They've got the Ark of the Covenant there. They take it in there. They put it in front of Dagon because he's that chief god that they go to whenever they're going to war. They revered him. They worshipped him. They believed in him, just like we revere and worship and we believe in God. They did that to Dagon. They loved Dagon. They'd make sacrifices to him, just like those Jews make sacrifices to God. Sometimes human sacrifices. They did all manner of things. They would pay tribute. They would do what they had to do to Dagon to get Dagon's blessing. But Dagon was about to meet his match. Dagon was about to lose a little bit of his standing. There was delivery. So you see in 1 Samuel chapter 5 verse 2 that whenever the Israelites lost, the ark was taken. And that was the pride of Israel. But you can imagine, this ark was always in the Holy of Holies, right? They had that temple. Well, I don't guess the temple was built yet, but they had that tent in Shiloh. They had set the tabernacle up there. The high priest would go into the Holy of Holies, and he would be there, and that ark would be there. That ark was what led them in the wilderness. Whenever they would get everything set up, the ark would go before the camp, and it would lead them as they went through the wilderness. The ark represented God to Israel. You can imagine that the ark represented God to Israel, and the Philistines just took it. And they delivered it to the house of their chief god, Dagon. Now, you can imagine that for every weeping Israelite, for every despairing Israelite, for every person in Israel who was just completely upset and hopeless at the fact that they had lost the Ark of the Covenant, there was someone in Ashdod that was cheering. Oh, you can imagine the fanfare as they brought the Ark into the city. You can imagine the men patting each other on the back and giving each other attaboys and just having a good time and just, just being happy that they had whipped Israel, and there they are. They're right there, and they're doing what they do. They're just celebrating that they have taken the Ark of the Covenant. You can imagine whenever they pull back the door there of that house of Dagon, whenever they pull that ark inside of there, you can imagine Dagon's idol standing there, probably a very big thing because he was a very prominent god. And there it was, and him half fish on the bottom and half man on top, and his hands held up. I've seen pictures of different Dagon statues, and that's what they look like. And there he is, and him standing there looking down all hateful and mean like those gods would look in those statues. And they bring that Ark of the Covenant in there, and they put the Ark of the Covenant in front of Dagon, and you can imagine that they thought, this is the ultimate tribute to Dagon. He's surely going to bless us now. And they put that thing right there. They delivered the Ark of God into the hands of these priests in this temple to this false god Dagon. It was a tribute. It was an offering. We've seen Dagon. We've seen the delivery. Let's look at the dominance. Let's look at the dominance now. 1 Samuel chapter 5, verse 3. And when they of Ashdod arose early on the morrow, I bet they was excited. I bet they didn't sleep good that night. I bet they were all tossing and turning. They probably celebrated most of the night away, and then after they did get to sleep, whenever they woke up, I bet they were excited. People were thinking, I'm going to go by the house of Dagon. I'm going to see the Ark of the Covenant. But the first people up, I guarantee you, were the priests of Dagon. It says, and when they of Ashdod arose early on the morrow, behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the earth before the Ark of the Lord. And they took Dagon and set him in his place again. They thought, well, that was a little weird, maybe there's a small earthquake in the night. There was a small earthquake in the night over here. Maybe there was a small earthquake in the night, and he just kind of shook a little bit. Or, maybe a bird flew into it or something like that, and it just got off. I don't know, but it was just a fluke. So they set Dagon back up, and he's sitting there, and he's fine. And then in verse 4 it says, and they arose early on the morrow morning. Behold, Dagon was fallen upon his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were cut off upon the threshold. Only the stump of Dagon was left to him. Therefore neither the priest of Dagon nor any that come into Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod unto this day. Now, it's an interesting thing whenever stuff moves around and nobody's there. We'll be sitting around the house sometimes, and there'll just be something fall off the wall or fall off a shelf. I don't guess anything's fell off the wall, but stuff just fall off a shelf. And there ain't nobody there, it makes the goosebumps raise up on you. We've been over to a friend's house sometimes. We'll be sitting around watching a movie, and there was one night that a pine cone fell off his mantelpiece. There was no reason. There was no wind blowing. It just fell off his mantelpiece and fell over. And no one knows what happened, but it made the goosebumps stand up. You're not expecting stuff like that to happen. That's a weird thing. But imagine how the priest of Dagon must have felt whenever they go in, and that next morning, that image of Dagon was just laying on the floor, face down in front of the Ark of the Covenant. Nobody in Ashdod would have done that. None of those priests would have been like, oh, I think it'd be a great idea to make it look like that Dagon was bound down to the ark. That'd be fun. Let's do that. No one would do that. No one in Ashdod would have done that. No one would have thought that was a good idea. No one would have thought that was cute or funny because they believed in Dagon. I bet whenever they went back in there and they set that image back up, I bet they looked over the Ark of the Covenant and it just kind of glowed a little bit. I bet it was just sparkling just a little bit. I bet it creeped them out. They put that image back up and then they left. And then the day goes on, people come by, they're still kind of patting each other on the back, still kind of happy about how things went. And then they go home that night and they go to bed, and in the temple of Dagon, early in the morning probably, or late at night, you hear a big thud. And you hear that sound of stone cracking and then stone sliding on stone as Dagon's statue fell apart. They come out to the temple the next morning, those priests do, I'm sure the night before that they made sure that Dagon was standing sturdy. I'm sure that they made sure he was secure, that he had stuff underneath him. He had a good solid base he was on. They may have even tied him to a pole. I don't know. But I guarantee you that they made sure he wasn't wobbling whenever they left. And yet they come in the next morning, old Dagon's laying on the floor. His head is broke off and face down in front of the Ark of the Covenant. The palms of his hands are broke off and laying on the ground. And I bet you that they were scared to death. I'd be scared. I mean, just to be honest, but between me and you, I'm kind of a big chicken anyway. I told you guys that before. It's the truth. I wouldn't want to come into something like that knowing that I had to fight that God, that Dagon had bowed down to. Now, there's two things I want to talk about this. First one is this. There's a God that dwells on that ark. Whenever the high priest would go into the Holy of Holies, he would get down there and God would speak to him from the Ark of the Covenant. Whenever Moses would go into the Holy of Holies, God would speak to him. He would come between the cherubs. And I don't know exactly how it happened. I don't know if there was some kind of a manifestation that would show up between those cherubim on the top of the Ark of the Covenant. They faced each other. I don't know if it would happen like that, or if it would be a thing where God just kind of spoke and it just came from that general direction. I don't know how it went, but I do know this. I know that that's where God dwelt. He dwelt on the Ark of the Covenant. It wasn't like today, the Holy Spirit lives in us and God dwells in us, and we have God inside of our hearts. That's why people say, I've got Jesus in my heart, and He leads me and He guides me. It's because that Holy Spirit lives there, right? Well, God lived in the Ark of the Covenant. He was there on top of that. That was where they went for instruction. That's where they went to make petition. That's why whenever they would make the big yearly sin offering, that blood would come into the Holy of Holies, because that's where God was. That priest was trying to appease God. He was coming to God for the people. So God is there, right there. And I want you to realize that there is a little g God that dwelt in that idol of Dagon. You say, Nathan, you believe in that kind of stuff? Absolutely I do, because the Bible mentions it. I'll give you a verse here in just a minute. But the Bible mentions little g gods. People aren't stupid, all right? We have to understand, just because these people lived in a time maybe that they weren't as technologically advanced as we are, they're not stupid. People are people, and they're not just going to believe anything coming and going. There had to be some root of truth to what they believed. Something had to have happened for them to follow that tradition. I mean, you're not going to find some man that's just going to give his daughter up to be a temple virgin to sell herself in the temple for favors for priests. You're not going to just find some guy to give his daughter up unless there's something to it. So that's what was going on in Ashdod. There was a reason why people worshiped Dagon, and it was probably there was an evil spirit, some kind of devil of hell, that had attached himself to Dagon and would do favors for the people if they did things for him. That's how that worked. That's why all those gods are cruel. That's why all those gods are, I mean, it doesn't take long reading about mythology before you realize that the gods are very twisted beings. And they're evil and they're sinful and they're no good. So there was a spirit that dwelled in that image of Dagon. So that first night, God looks over. He's in that room there in the temple of Dagon. He looks around. He says, this place is trash. I mean, this is a junky place. What am I even doing here? Looks over, and there's Dagon, and God is here, and Dagon's here. And God looks at Dagon and says, now, Dagon, you're not supposed to stand in front of me. And Dagon says, yes, sir, I'm sorry. He hits the ground face first. That idol falls over. That day goes on. The next night, they're in there. God looks around. There's Dagon again standing up. God said, now, Dagon, I told you once already. That's enough. You get down where you're supposed to be. And Dagon hits the ground. Yes, sir, I'm sorry. And that idol's head breaks off and his palms break off. You need to understand that whenever you're looking at this, Psalm 95:3, that's the verse I was telling you about, it says this: for the Lord is a great God and a great king above all little g gods. He's a great king above all little g gods. Dagon isn't even in God's league at all. As a matter of fact, whenever you put the two side by side, Dagon isn't even close. There's not even a chance that he can do half the stuff God can do. God is God. God made everything. For Dagon to stand in front of God is ridiculous. And that's what God was showing those people in Ashdod. I want you to notice how Dagon loses his head in his hands. You'll find that down there in verse number 4, that it says that his head was cut off and the palms of his hands were cut off. That's because, he loses his hands because he's completely unable to handle God. He can't do anything about it. His hands, because he's powerless to fight against God. He loses his hands because when it comes to working things out, Dagon can't do anything. He loses his hands because when it comes to warfare, he can't fight like God can. He loses his hands because whenever it comes to solving problems, he can't solve problems like God can. When it comes to nurturing people, Dagon's hands can't nurture like God's hands can nurture. When it comes to protection, Dagon's hands can't protect like God can protect. Whenever it comes to doing anything, when it comes to creation, Dagon's hands can't create like God's hands can create. So he loses his hands. He loses his ability to work. Whenever the priests come in and they see that his hands are gone, they realize that Dagon is powerless. But when they look over and notice that his head is broke off, they realize that that's what happens to people who defy the God. God will break you. Now, you can take that 2 or 3 different ways. Physically, you can take it like this: that it's God's choice, it's God's right, it's well within God's power to take you out whenever He sees fit. But you can look at it like this too: that whenever it comes to thought, your intellectual ability is no match for God's. I've been around some very smart people. I've talked to some very smart people. And it's really interesting whenever you find someone who is practically a genius who is a Christian. Because as smart as they are, they realize God is smarter. I've been around people who were smart and they didn't believe in God one bit. And they might have a lot of book sense, but sometimes it's like they didn't have a brain in their head when it came to life. And it came to living, and it came to love, and it came to compassion. They couldn't bridge that gap because they don't have the smarts that God gives someone who'll just accept Him. I don't know. It's a very interesting thing whenever you find out that Dagon lost his head completely in this temple, and these priests come. They're coming every day. You can imagine this is their job. They come to the temple. They do the work of the temple. They come in there. They've never had any trouble with Dagon before. They've never had any trouble with any other gods coming in there. Dagon's always been able to keep his cool and keep his head. And then this day, whenever the Ark of the Covenant's sitting there and that idol is falling over and his head's broken off, I'm sure there was a lot of thoughts that ran through their head. His hands are cut off. What does that mean? His head's cut off. What does that mean? Who would do this? And they look over and there the Ark of the Covenant is, and it's still standing. Still sparkly. And I bet they got the cold chills on them, but they got goose pimples, and they run out of there and they was just scared to death. Matter of fact, they were so scared that it said they didn't even come back over the threshold of the house. And lastly, we've seen Dagon, and we've seen the delivery. We've seen God's ability to dominate. But lastly, verse 4, there's destruction. Or my fourth point, there's destruction. You'll find in verses 5 through 7 of 1 Samuel chapter 5, it says, "Therefore neither the priest of Dagon nor any that come into Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon and Ashdod unto this day. But the hand of the Lord was heavy upon them of Ashdod, and he destroyed them and smote them with emerods, even Ashdod and the coast thereof. And when the men of Ashdod saw that it was so, they said, The ark of the God of Israel shall not abide with us, for his hand is sore upon us and upon Dagon our God." Now they got emerods. Emerods are hemorrhoids. God gave these guys hemorrhoids so bad that it was literally killing people. God was getting His point across. You don't mess with God. You don't mess with the things of God. You don't mess with the people of God. You don't mess with those things. You don't try to assert your dominance over those things, because God will take care of the problem. You realize, now let's just talk about it like this. At this point in time, Ashdod is in an uproar. People they're hurting, they're in pain, they've got hemorrhoids so bad they can't walk, they can't sit down, they can't do anything. It's a horrible thing. And it's not just that God scared the priest of Dagon. This was in every walk of life. The mayor had emerods. The town council had emerods. The workers at the gas station had emerods. The factory workers had emerods. The family, moms at home had emerods. The children were running around, and I'm sure they had them too. It was a terrible thing to say, why would God do something like that? Because God was trying to get a point across. No one wants to be a priest of Dagon. I bet they had there was probably one or two that were still pretty stalwart. They're like, well, we're not going to go in there, but we're still faithful to Dagon. Who wants to be a priest? I bet nobody was signing up. No one wants the ark around. All this great victory just a few days ago, it was wonderful, but now the ark's still there, and everyone's like, we need to get that thing out of here. None of this trouble happened until you brought that thing here. You said, Nathan, what does all this even mean? What are you even getting at? This is a weird story. It is a weird story. But this is the main point. This is what I'm trying to get at. In the middle of destruction, right? In the middle of defeat, while Israel was upset and just tore to pieces because the ark of God was taken, in the middle of all of that, God takes that defeat right into the heart of the enemy camp and he turns it into a victory. Even in defeat, God's hand is apparent, and God's hand will turn that destruction, that defeat, that despair into victory. And maybe you feel like today that you're in a spot where the power of God is off of your life. Maybe you feel like today you're in a spot where you have no hope, you have no peace. Maybe you're in a spot today where you feel like your faith is wavering. Maybe you're in a spot today where you've been out of the house of God for so long and it's been a while since we've been in church, where you feel like you're not even a Christian anymore. I want you to know this, that out of this despair, out of this defeat, out of this destruction, out of this trouble, if you'll let God do what God does, you'll have victory. Because see, even while we're dealing with our problem in the nation of Israel, they were despairing because the ark was gone. There were men that were mad wanting to go get it back. I'm sure there were people that were they thought, well, God's done with us. We're done. That's it. This is over. I'm just going to quit. And yet, the whole time all that was going on, all the turmoil that was in the nation of Israel, God was over here wreaking havoc on the Philistines. Don't you ever think that God can't do what you need him to do just because you feel defeated. Because I promise you, God is still victorious. That's all I've got for today. Remember, you keep those guys in prayers. Pray for Lawrence. Pray for Carmen that, Lawrence just keeps improving and Carmen will, get herself adjusted to not working. And pray for Pam and Cliff. Keep Cliff in your prayers especially. His leg's still giving him trouble, but keep them both lifted up. Pray for Noah and Sheila that everything will work out good there. And if you have any other prayer requests, send them to the message group or leave them on Facebook. I love you guys, and we're looking forward to getting back over there here eventually. Y'all just keep us in your prayers. We'll be praying for you. God bless you guys, and we'll see you soon.